plastic. That's what they like. So if you want to find the common ground.
The platonic form of a Vic.
But could we have an article about that very big pen in your hand? Lex Friedman's big pen as of this week.
The very
specific instance. And the answer is no. There's not much known about it. I dare say, unless it's very special to you and your great grandmother gave it to you or something. You probably know very little about it. It's a pen. It's just here in the office. So that's just to show there is a limit. I mean, in German Wikipedia they used to talk about the rear nut of the wheel of Uli Fuchs' bicycle. Uli Fuchs, the well-known Wikipedian of the time, to sort of illustrate that you can't have an article about literally everything. So then it raises the question, what can you have an article about? What can't you? And that can vary depending on the subject matter. One of the areas where we try to be much more careful would be biographies. The reason is a biography of a living person, if you get it wrong, it can actually be quite hurtful, quite damaging. And so if someone is a private person and somebody tries to create a Wikipedia entry, there's no way to update it. There's not much known. So, for example, an encyclopedia article about my mother, school teacher, this is a wonderful woman, but never been in the news. I mean, other than me talking about why there shouldn't be a Wikipedia entry, it's probably made it in somewhere, standard example. But there's not enough known, and you could sort of imagine a database of genealogy having date of birth, date of death, some certain elements like that of other people, but you couldn't really write a biography. One of the areas this comes up quite often is what we call BLP1E. We've got lots of acronyms. Biography of a living person.
Wikipedia article. Should definitely get
real
that right.
sort of danger zone.
Took it.
And the type of example would be a victim of a crime. So someone who's a victim of a famous serial killer, but about whom really not much is known. They weren't a public person. They're just a victim of a crime. We really shouldn't have an article about that person. They'll be mentioned, of course, and maybe the specific crime might have an article. But for that person, no, not really.
I think they should.
Not really something that.
I think that makes them famous.
Because how can you write a biography about someone you don't know much about? Things like that. You may not know anything about their personal life, but that's actually not encyclopedically relevant in the same way that it is for a member of a royal family.
Dude, fuck those bitches.
So, we're fairly nuanced about notability.
Nuanced is dick.
And I've always thought that the term notability, I think, is a little problematic. I mean, we struggle about how to talk about it. The problem with notability is it can feel insulting. So, no, you're not noteworthy. Well, my mother's noteworthy. She's a really important person in my life, right? So that's not right. But it's more like verifiability. Is there a way to get information that actually makes an encyclopedia entry?
It so happens that there's a Wikipedia page about me, as I've learned recently. And the first thought I had when I saw that was, surely I am not notable enough. So I was very surprised and grateful that such a page could exist. And actually just allow me to say thank you to all the incredible people that are part of creating and maintaining Wikipedia. It's my favorite website on the internet, the collection of articles that Wikipedia has created.
Well, dog, you haven't been to the Chabad website, specifically the Jewish woman, dog.
Details of that, but the love and care that goes into creating
this shit sucks.
Individuals.
Scale of 0 to 10, Z to 10, with
really
Z being this, and 10 being anything but this, this is a negative.
Through this podcast, gotten to know a few
Thousands.
that are quite controversial.
The worst.
I've gotten to be on the receiving end of something quite.
This is just so bad. There's no content. No one likes it. It's boring.
At some kind of attacks to the Wikipedia form. Like you said,
this is the worst.
It can be quite hurtful. The little details of information. And because I've become friends with Elon Musk, and I've interviewed him, but I've also interviewed people on the left, far left, people on the right, some people would say far right, and so now you take a step, put your toe into the cold pool of politics, and a shark emerges from the depths and pulls you right in.
Boiling hot.
And so I get to experience some of that. what you also realize is there has to be for Wikipedia kind of credible sources, verifiable sources, and there's a dance there because some of the sources are pieces of journalism, and of course journalism operates under its own complicated incentives, such that people can write articles that are not factual or are cherry picking all the flaws that you can have in a journalistic article.
For sure.
And those can be used as sources. It's like they dance hand in hand. And so, for me, sadly enough, there was a really kind of concerted attack to say that I was never at MIT, I never did anything at MIT. Just to clarify, I am a research scientist at MIT. In 2015, I'm there today. I'm at a prestigious, amazing laboratory called LIDS, and I hope to be there
Lids
for a
like
long
the place
time.
at the
I'm
mall with the
AI,
hats?
robotics, machine learning. There's a lot of incredible people there, and by the way, MIT has been very kind to defend me. Unlike Wikipedia says, it is not an unpaid position. There was no controversy. It was all very calm and happy, almost boring research that I've been doing there. And the other thing, because I am half Ukrainian, half Russian, and I've traveled to Ukraine, and I will travel to Ukraine again, and I will travel to Russia for some very difficult conversations. My heart's been broken by this war. I have family in both places. It's been a really difficult time. But the little battle about the biography there also starts becoming important for the first time for me. I also want to clarify, sort of personally, use this opportunity of some inaccuracies there. My father was not born in Chkalsk, Russia. He was born in Kiev, Ukraine. I was born in Chkalsk, which is a town not in Russia. There is a town called that in Russia. There's another town in Tajikistan, which is a former republic of the Soviet Union. That town is now called Buston, Buston, which is funny because we're now in Austin, and I also am in Boston. It seems like my whole life is surrounded by these kinds of towns. So I was born in Tajikistan, and the rest of the biography is interesting, but my family is very evenly distributed between their origins and where they grew up between Ukraine and Russia, which adds a whole beautiful complexity to this whole thing. So I want to just correct that. It's like the fascinating thing about Wikipedia is that in some sense those little details don't matter. But in another sense, what I felt when I saw a Wikipedia page about me or anybody I know
This is athleticism.
Kind of
This is
saving
unprecedented athleticism, folks.
Like a community that notices you. It says,
Hot ride?
You see like a butterfly that floats, and you're like, huh, that it's not just any butterfly, it's that one. I like that one. Or you see a puppy or something, or it's this big pen. This one, I remember this one has this strap. You get noticed in that way, and that, I don't know, it's a beautiful thing, and I mean, maybe it's very silly of me and naive, but I feel like Wikipedia, in terms of individuals, is an opportunity to celebrate people, to celebrate ideas,
for sure,
and not a battleground of attacks of the kind of stuff we might see on Twitter, like the mockery, the derision, this kind of stuff.
For sure.
And of course, you don't want to cherry pick. All of us have flaws and so on, but it just feels like to highlight a controversy of some sort, and that doesn't at all represent the entirety of the human. In most cases, is sad.
Yeah. So there's a few things to unpack in all that. So first, one of the things I always find very interesting is, your status with MIT. Okay, that's upsetting, and it's an argument and can be sorted out. But then what's interesting is you gave as much time to that, which is actually important and relevant to your career and so on, to also where your father was born, which most people would hardly notice, but is really meaningful to you. And I find that a lot when I talk to people who have a biography in Wikipedia, is they're often as annoyed by a tiny error that no one's going to notice. Like this town in Tajikistan has got a new name and so on. Like nobody even knows what that means or whatever. But it's super important. And so that's one of the reasons, for biographies, we say like human dignity really matters. And so, some of the things have to do with, and this is a common debate that goes on in Wikipedia is what we call undue weight. So I'll give an example. Um, there was an article I stumbled across many years ago about the mayor. Or no, he wasn't a mayor. He was a city council member. I think he was Peoria, Illinois, but some small town in the Midwest. And the entry, he's been on the city council for 30 years or whatever. He's frankly, pretty boring guy. He seems like a good local city politician. But in this very short biography, there was a whole paragraph, a long paragraph, about his son being arrested for DUI. And it was clearly undue weight. It's like, what does this got to do with this guy, if it even deserves a mention? It wasn't even clear, had he done anything hypocritical? Had he done himself anything wrong? Even his son got a DUI. That's never great. It happens to people. It doesn't seem like a massive scandal for your dad. So, of course, I just took that out immediately. This is a long, long time ago. And that's the sort of thing where, uh, you know, we have to really think about in a biography and about controversies to say, is this a real controversy? So in general, like one of the things we tend to say is like any section, so if there's a biography and there's a section called controversies, that's actually poor practice because it just invites people to say, oh, I want to work on this entry. See, there's 7 sections. Oh, this one's quite short. Can I add something? Right. Go out and find some more controversy. No, that's nonsense, right? And in general, putting it separate from everything else kind of makes it seem worse and also doesn't put it in the right context. Whereas if it's sort of alive, well, then there is a controversy. There's always attached to controversy for anyone. It should just be sort of worked into the overall article. Then it doesn't become a temptation. You can contextualize appropriately and so forth. So that's, that's part of the whole process. But I think for me, one of the most important things is what I call community health. So yeah, are we going to get it wrong sometimes? Yeah, of course. We're humans, and doing good quality, sort of reference material is hard. The real question is, how do people react, to a criticism or a complaint or a concern? And if the reaction is defensiveness or combativeness back, or if someone's really sort of in there being aggressive and in the wrong, like, no, hold on, we've got to do this the right way. You got to say, okay, hold on, are there good sources? Is this contextualized appropriately? Is it even important enough to mention? What does it mean? And sometimes one of the areas where I do think there is a very complicated flaw, and you've alluded to it a little bit, but it's like, we know the media is deeply flawed. We know that journalism can go wrong, and I would say particularly in the last, 15 years, we've seen a real decimation of local media, local newspapers. We've seen a real rise in clickbait headlines and sort of eager focus on anything that might be controversial. We've always had that with us, of course. There's always been tabloid newspapers. But that makes it a little bit more challenging to say, okay, how do we sort things out when we have a pretty good sense that not every source is valid. So, as an example, a few years ago, it's been quite a while now, we deprecated uh, the Mail Online as a source. Um, and the Mail Online, the digital arm of the Daily Mail, it's a tabloid. It's not completely, it's not fake news, but it does tend to run very hyped up stories. They really love to attack people and go on the attack for political reasons and so on. And it just isn't great. And so by saying deprecated, and I think some people say, oh, you banned the Daily Mail. No, we didn't ban it as a source. We just said, look, it's probably not a great source, right? You should probably look for better sources. Certainly, if the Daily Mail runs a headline saying, new cure for cancer, but, probably there's more serious sources than a tabloid newspaper. So, in an article about lung cancer, you probably wouldn't cite the Daily Mail. That's kind of ridiculous. But also for celebrities and so forth, to sort of know, they do cover celebrity gossip a lot. Well, they also tend to have vendettas and so forth, and you really have to step back and go, is this really encyclopedic, or is this just the Daily Mail when you're on a rant?
And some of that requires a great community help.
Like, it requires massive community help.
I mean, even for me, for stuff I've seen that's kind of actually iffy about people I know, things I know about myself, I still feel like a love for knowledge emanating from the article. Like like I feel the community help. So I will take all slight inaccuracies. I love it because that means there's people. For the most part, I feel a respect and love in this search for knowledge. Like sometimes, because I also love Stack Overflow, Stack Exchange for programming related things, and they can get a little cranky sometimes to a degree where it's like it's not as like you can feel the dynamics of the health of the particular community and sub communities too, like particularly C# or Java or Python or whatever. Like there's little like communities that emerge. You can feel the levels of toxicity because a little bit of strictness is good, a little too much is bad because of the defensiveness. Because when somebody writes an answer and then somebody else kind of says, "Well, modify it," and they get defensive, and there's this tension that's not conducive to like improving towards a more truthful depiction of like what that topic.
Yeah, a great example that I really loved this morning that I saw. Someone left a note on my user talk page in English Wikipedia saying it was quite a dramatic headline. Racist hook on the front page. So we have on the front page of Wikipedia, we have a little section called Did You Know? And it's just little tidbits and facts, just things that you find interesting. And there's a whole process for how things get there. And the one that somebody was raising a question about was comparing a very well-known U.S. football player, black. There was a quote from another famous sport person comparing him to a Lamborghini, clearly a compliment. And so somebody said, actually, here's a study, here's some interesting information about how black sports people are far more often compared to inanimate objects and given that kind of analogy. And I think it's demeaning to compare a person to a car, et cetera, et cetera. But they said, I'm not deleting it, I'm not removing it, I just want to raise the question. And then there's this really interesting conversation that goes on where I think the general consensus was, you know what, this isn't like the alarming headline, racist thing on the front page of the computer. That sounds like, holy moly, that sounds like. But it's sort of like, actually, yeah, this probably isn't the sort of analogy that we think is great. And so we should probably think about how to improve our language and not compare sports people to inanimate objects, and particularly be aware of certain racial sensitivities that there might be around that sort of thing if there is a disparity in the media of how people are called. And I just thought, you know what? Nothing for me to weigh in on here. This is a good conversation. Like, nobody's saying, people should be banned if they refer to, what was his name? The refrigerator Perry. Very famous comparison to an inanimate object of a Chicago Bears player many years ago. But they're just saying, hey, let's be careful about analogies that we just pick up from the media. That's good.
On the sort of deprecation of news sources is really interesting because I think what you're saying is ultimately you want to make an article by article decision, kind of use your own judgment, and it's such a subtle thing because there's just a lot of hit pieces written about individuals like myself, for example, that masquerade as kind of an objective, thorough exploration of a human being. It's fascinating to watch because controversy and hit pieces just get clicks.
Oh yeah.
And this is I guess as a Wikipedia contributor, you start to deeply become aware of that and start to have a sense, like a radar of clickbait versus truth. Like to pick out the truth from the clickbaity type of language.
Oh yeah, I mean it's really important, and we talk a lot about weasel words, and actually I'm sure we'll end up talking about AI, ChatGPT, but just to quickly mention in this area, I think one of the potentially powerful tools, because it is quite good at this. I've played around with and practiced it quite a lot, but ChatGPT 4 is really quite able to take a passage and point out potentially biased terms, to rewrite it to be more neutral. Now, it is a bit anodyne and it's a bit, cliche. So sometimes it just takes the spirit out of something that's actually not bad. It's just like, poetic language, and you're like, okay, that's not actually helping. But sort of thing is quite interesting. And I'm also interested in, um, you know, can you imagine where you feed in a Wikipedia entry and all the sources, and you say, help me find anything in the article that is not accurately reflecting what's in the sources. And that doesn't have to be perfect. It only has to be good enough to be useful to community. So if it scans an article and all the sources and you say, oh, it came back with 10 suggestions, 7 of them were decent and 3 of them it just didn't understand, actually that's probably worth my time to do. And it can help us, really more quickly get good people to sort of review obscure entries and things like that.
So, just as a small aside on that, and we'll probably talk about language models a little bit or a lot more, but one of the articles, one of the hit pieces about me, the journalist actually was very straightforward and honest about having used GPT to write part of the article, and then finding that they made an error and apologized for the error that GPT-4 generated, which has this kind of interesting loop.
Yeah.
The articles are used to write Wikipedia pages.
Yeah.
GPT is trained on Wikipedia, and then there's like this interesting loop where the weasel words and the nuances can get lost or can propagate even though they're not grounded in reality. Somehow, in the generation of the language model, new truths can be created and kind of linger.
Yeah, there's a famous webcomic that's titled Psychogenesis, which is about how an error is in Wikipedia and there's no source for it, and then a lazy journalist reads it and writes the source, and then some helpful Wikipedian spots that it has no source, finds the source, and adds it to Wikipedia, and voila, magic. This happened to me once. It nearly happened. There was this. I mean, it was really brief. I went back and researched it. I'm like, this is really odd. So, Biography magazine, which is a magazine published by the Biography TV channel, had some profile of me, and it said, in his spare time, I'm not quoting exactly, it's been many years, but in his spare time he enjoys playing chess with friends. I thought, wow, that sounds great. Like, I would like to be that guy, but actually, I mean, I play chess with my kids sometimes, but no, I'm not, it's not a hobby of mine. And I was like, where did they get that? And I contacted the magazine and said, where did that come from? He said, oh, it was in Wikipedia. I looked in the history. There had been vandalism in Wikipedia, which is not, it's not damaging, it's just false. So, and it had already been removed. But then I thought, oh gosh, well, I better mention this to people because otherwise somebody's going to read that and they're going to add it to history and it's going to take on a life of its own. And then sometimes I wonder if it has because I was invited a few years ago to do the ceremonial first move in the World Chess Championship, and I thought, I wonder if they think I'm a really big chess enthusiast because I read this Biography magazine article thing. But that problem, when we think about large language models and the ability to quickly generate very plausible but not true content, I think is something that there's going to be a lot of shakeout, a lot of implications of that.
What would be hilarious is because of the social pressure of Wikipedia and the momentum, you would actually start playing a lot more chess. Just not only the articles are written based on Wikipedia, but your own life trajectory changes because of Wikipedia, just to make it more convenient.
Yeah.
Aspire to.
Yes. Yeah. Aspirational.
What if we just talk about that before we jump back to some other interesting topics on Wikipedia? Let's talk about GPT-4 and large language models. So they are in part trained on Wikipedia content.
Yeah.
What are the pros and cons of these language models? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. Obviously, the technology has moved very quickly in the last 6 months and looks poised to do so for some time to come. So, first things first, I mean, part of our philosophy is the open licensing, the free licensing, the idea that, this is what we're here for. We are a volunteer community and we write this encyclopedia, we give it to the world to do what you like with. You can modify it, redistribute it, redistribute modified versions, commercially, non-commercially. This is the licensing. So in that sense, of course, it's completely fine. Now, we do worry a bit about attribution because it is a Creative Commons attribution share alike license. So attribution is important, not just because of our licensing model and things like that, but it's just proper attribution is just good intellectual practice. And that's a really hard, complicated question. If I were to write something about my visit here, I might say in a blog post, I was in Austin, which is a city in Texas. I'm not going to put a source for Austin as a city in Texas. That's general knowledge. I learned it somewhere. I can't tell you where. So you don't have to cite and reference every single thing. If I actually did research and I used something very heavily, it's just morally proper to give your sources. So we would like to see that, and obviously, they call it grounding. So particularly people at Google are really keen on figuring out grounding.
That's like a cool term. So any text that's generated, trying to ground it to the Wikipedia quality source. I mean, the same kind of standard of what a source means that Wikipedia uses. The same kind of source generated.
Yeah, the same kind of thing. And of course, one of the biggest flaws in ChatGPT right now is that it just literally will make things up just to be amiable. I think it's programmed to be very helpful and amiable and doesn't really know or care about the truth.
You get bullied into
you
can't be convinced.
Well, but like this morning, the story I was telling earlier about comparing a football player to a Lamborghini, and I thought, well, is that really racial? I don't know. I'm mulling it over, and I thought I'm going to go to ChatGPT. So I sent to ChatGPT 4. I said, this happened in Wikipedia. Can you think of examples where a white athlete has been compared to a fast car, inanimate object? And it comes up with a very plausible essay where it tells why these analogies are common and so on. I said, no, could you give me some specific examples? So it gives me 3 specific examples, very plausible, correct names of athletes and contemporaries and all that. Could have been true. Googled every single quote and none of them existed. And so I'm like, well, that's really not good. Like, I wanted to explore a thought process I was in. I thought, first I thought, how do I Google? And I thought, well, it's kind of a hard thing to Google because unless somebody has written about this specific topic, it's, about, it's large language model. It's processed all this data. It can probably piece that together for me. But it just can't yet. So I think, I hope that ChatGPT 5, 6, 7, 3 to 5 years, I'm hoping we'll see a much higher, level of accuracy, where when you ask a question like that, I think instead of being quite so eager to please by giving you a plausible sounding answer, it's just say, don't know.
Or maybe display the how much bullshit might be in this generated text. Like, yeah. I really would like to make you happy right now, but I'm really stretched thin with this generated.
Well, it's one of the things I've said for a long time. So in Wikipedia, one of the great things we do may not be great for our reputation, except in a deeper sense for the long term, I think it is. But we'll be a notice that says the neutrality of this section has been disputed, or the following section doesn't cite any sources. And I always joke, sometimes I wish the New York Times would run a banner saying the neutrality of this has been disputed. They could give us an. We had a big fight in the newsroom as to whether to run this or not. But we thought it's important enough to bring it to, but just be aware that not all the journalists are on board with it. Oh, that's actually interesting, and that's fine. I would trust them more for that level of transparency. So yeah, similarly, ChatGPT should say, 87% bullshit.
Well, the neutrality one is really interesting because that's basically a summary of the discussions that are going on underneath. It would be amazing if, I should be honest, I don't look at the top page often. I don't. It would be nice somehow if there was a kind of a summary in this banner way of like, lots of wars have been fought on this here land for this here paragraph.
It's really interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that because one of the things I do spend a lot of time thinking about these days, and people find that we're moving slowly, that we are moving, thinking about, okay, these tools exist. Are there ways that this stuff can be useful to our community? Because a part of it is we do approach things in a non-commercial way, in a really deep sense. It's like it's been great that Wikipedia has become very popular, but really we're a community whose hobby is writing an encyclopedia. That's first, and if it's popular, great. If it's not, okay, we might have trouble paying for more servers, but it'll be fine. And so, how do we help the community use these tools? What are the ways that these tools can support people? And one example I never thought about, I'm going to start playing with it, is feed in the article and feed in the talk page, and say, can you suggest some warnings in the article based on the conversations on the talk page? I think it might be good. It might get it wrong sometimes, but again, if it's reasonably successful at doing that, and you can say, oh, actually, yeah, it does suggest, um, you know, the neutrality of this has been disputed on a section that has a 7-page discussion in the back. It might be useful. I don't know.
I mean, some more color to the, not neutrality, but also the amount of emotion laden in the exploration of this particular part of the topic.
Yeah.
It might actually help you look at more controversial pages, like on a page on the war in Ukraine or a page on Israel and Palestine. There could be parts that everyone agrees on, and there's parts that are just tough.
The hard parts.
And it's hard. It would be nice to, when looking at those beautiful long articles, to know, like, all right, let me just take in some stuff where everybody agrees on.
I give an example that I haven't looked at in a long time, but I was really pleased with what I saw at the time. So the discussion was that they're building something in Israel, and for their own political reasons, one side calls it a wall, harkening back to Berlin Wall, apartheid. The other calls it a security fence. So we can understand quite quickly, if we give it a moment's thought, like, okay, I understand why people would have this grappling over the language. Like, okay, you want to highlight the negative aspects of this, and you want to highlight the positive aspects, so you're going to try and choose a different name. And so there was this really fantastic Wikipedia discussion on the talk page. How do we word that paragraph? Talk about the different naming. It's called this by Israelis, called this by Palestinians. And that, how you explain that to people could be quite charged. You could easily explain, oh, there's this difference, and it's because this side's good and this side's bad, and that's why there's a difference. Or you could say, actually, let's try and really stay as neutral as we can and try to explain the reasons. So you may come away from it with a concept. Oh, okay, I understand what this debate is about now.
And just the term Israel-Palestine conflict is still the title of page of Wikipedia, but the word conflict is something that is a charged word.
Of course, yeah.
Because from the Palestinian side or from certain sides, the word conflict doesn't accurately describe the situation, because if you see it as a genocide, one-way genocide is not a conflict, because to them, to people that discuss that challenge the word conflict, they see conflict is when there's two equally powerful sides fighting.
Yeah. No, it's hard, and in a number of cases. So this actually speaks to a slightly broader phenomenon, which is there are a number of cases where there is no one word that can give consensus, and in the body of an article, that's usually okay because we can explain the whole thing. We can come away with an understanding of why each side wants to use a certain word. But there are some aspects of it, like the page has to have a title. So there's that. Same thing with certain things like photos. It's like, well, there's different photos. Which one's best? A lot of different views on that. But at the end of the day, you need the lead photo because there's one slot for a lead photo. Categories is another one. So at one point, I have no idea if it's in there today. I don't think so. I was listed in, American, where's mine? American atheists, and I said, that doesn't feel right to me. Like, just personally, it's true. I mean, I wouldn't disagree with the objective fact of it. But when you click the category and you see sort of a lot of people who are, you might say, American atheist activists, because that's their big issue. So Malin Murray O'Hair, or various famous people who, Richard Dawkins, who make it a big part of their public argument and persona. Well, that's not true of me. It's just like my private personal belief. It's not something I campaign about. So it felt weird to put me in the category, but what category would you put me? And do you need that? In this case, I argued that doesn't need that kind of. That's not. I don't speak about it publicly except incidentally from time to time. I don't campaign about it, so it's weird to put me with this group of people. And that argument carried the day. I hope not because it was me, but categories can be like that, where you're either in the category or you're not, and sometimes it's a lot more complicated than that. And is it, again, we go back to, is it undue weight? If someone who is now prominent in public life and generally considered to be a good person was convicted of something, let's say DUI, when they were young, we normally, in normal sort of discourse, we don't think, oh, this person should be in the category of American criminals. Because you think, oh, criminal, technically speaking, it's against the law to drive under the influence of alcohol, and you were arrested, and you spent a month in prison or whatever. But it's odd to say that's a criminal. So, just as an example in this area is Mark Wahlberg, Marky Mark. I always think of him as, because that's his first sort of famous name, who I wouldn't think should be listed as in the category American criminal, even though he was convicted of quite a bad crime when he was a young person, but we don't think of him as a criminal. Should the entry talk about that? Yeah, that's actually an important part of his life story. That he had a very rough youth and he could have, gone down a really dark path and he turned his life around. That's actually interesting. So, categories are tricky.
Especially with people, because we like to assign labels to people and to ideas somehow, and those labels stick.
Yeah.
And there's certain words that have a lot of power, like criminal, like political, left, right, center, anarchist, objectivist, what other philosophies are there? Marxist, communist, social democrat, democratic socialist, socialist. And like if you add that as a category, all of a sudden it's like, oh boy, you're that guy now.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you want to be
well,
that
there's
guy.
definitely some really charged ones. Alt-right things quite complicated and tough. I mean, it's not a completely meaningless label, but boy, I think you really have to pause before you actually put that label on someone. Partly because now you're putting them in a group of people, some of whom are quite you wouldn't want to be grouped with. So it's
Let's go into some. You mentioned the hot water of the pool that we're both dipping a toe in. Do you think Wikipedia has a left-leaning political bias, which is something it is sometimes accused of?
Yeah, so I don't think so. Not broadly. And I think you can always point to specific entries and talk about specific biases, but that's part of the process of Wikipedia. Anyone can come and challenge and to go on about that. But I see fairly often on Twitter, some sort of quite extreme accusations of bias, and I think actually I don't see it. I don't buy that. If you ask people for an example, they normally struggle. And depending on who they are and what it's about. So it's certainly true that some people who have quite fringe viewpoints, and who knows, the full rush of history in 500 years, they might be considered to be path-breaking geniuses, but at the moment, quite fringe views, and they're just unhappy that Wikipedia doesn't report on their fringe views as being mainstream. And that, by the way, goes across all kinds of fields. I mean, I was once accosted on the street outside the TED conference in Vancouver by a guy who's a homeopath who was very upset that Wikipedia's entry on homeopathy basically says it's pseudoscience. And he felt that was biased, and I can't really help you because we cite good quality sources to talk about the scientific status, and it's not very good. So, it depends. And, I think it's something that we should always be vigilant about. But it's, in general, I think we're pretty good. And I think any time you go to any serious political controversy, we should have a pretty balanced perspective on who's saying what the views are, and so forth. I would actually argue that the areas where we are more likely to have bias that persists for a long period of time are actually fairly obscure things, or maybe fairly non-political things. I just give kind of a humorous example, but it's meaningful. If you read our entries about Japanese anime, they tend to be very, very positive and very favorable because almost no one knows about Japanese anime except for fans. And so the people who come and spend their days writing Japanese anime articles, they love it. They kind of have an inherent love for the whole area. They'll, of course, being human beings, have their internal debates and disputes about what's better or not. You know? But in general, they're quite positive because nobody actually cares. And anything that people are quite passionate about, then hopefully, there's quite a lot of interesting stuff. So I'll give an example, a contemporary example, where I think we've done a good job as of my most recent sort of look at it. And that is the question about the efficacy of masks during the COVID pandemic. And that's an area where I would say the public authorities really kind of jerked us all around a bit. In the very first days, they said, whatever you do, don't rush out and buy masks. And their concern was shortages in hospitals. Okay, fair enough. Later, it's like, well, everybody's got to wear a mask everywhere. It really worked really well, and then now I think the evidence is mixed, right? Masks seem to help. In my personal view, masks seem to help. They're no huge burden. You might as well wear a mask in any environment where with a giant crowd of people and so forth. But it's very politicized, that one. And it's very politicized where certainly in the U.S., much more so. I mean, I live in the U.K., I live in London. I've never seen on the streets sort of the kind of thing that there's a lot of reports of people actively angry because someone else is wearing a mask, that sort of thing, in public. And so, because of it or whatever, it's
about the conspiracy theory of flat Earth.
Geez, probably not even, because it's not
Political leaning of political events, of Hunter Biden's laptop, of how big of a story that is or not, of the censorship of that story is or not, that kind of, and then there's these camps that take very strong points and they construct big narratives around that, and it's a very sizable percent of the population believes the two narratives that compete with each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, and it feels, but it's hard to judge, the sweep of history within your own lifetime.
Yeah.
But it feels like it's gotten much worse. That this idea of two parallel universes where people can agree on certain basic facts feels worse than it used to be. And I'm not sure if that's true or if it just feels that way, but I'm not sure what the causes are. I think I would lay a lot of the blame in recent years on social media algorithms, which reward clickbait headlines, which reward my most successful tweet ever by fairly wide. He's not a massive influencer or whatever, but how model makes it really hard for them. And I'm not anti-capitalism. I'm not, great. Somebody's got a business, they're making money. That's not where I come from. But sort of the long-term health and the next 50 years of this organization, we need to raise. Suddenly, certainly